My name is Adam Blagtroy, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Creative Circle. I just could not be happier that you all have taken some time out this afternoon to spend it with us, and more importantly, with Christine Moorman. I have been a fan of the CMO survey for years and have found it really to be something that is incredibly informative to me as a marketer. The ability that they have to acquire research from senior executives like you and like myself, I think is wonderful. A few ground rules as we go through the presentation today, and then Christine's going to get started. The first is we welcome questions. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Ask a question. We will take periodic pauses in the presentation and try to get to the questions that you've posted them. So post them as we go. Don't wait till the end of the section. Again, put your questions in the Q&A and we will pull them out and we will get to them at a periodic number of pauses during Christine's presentation. So with that said, welcome to this afternoon and to a conversation we're going to have about the CMO survey. I'm now going to pass the leadership of this conversation to Christine Moorman of Duke University and the Fuqua School of Business. She is without a doubt the leading expert on how we marketers feel and how we have responded to marketing components here during this COVID crisis. So Christine, really appreciate you being here, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to interact with all of you. I'm thrilled to be able to show you some of the results from the CMO survey and also to take your questions. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the CMO survey, let me just give a very brief introduction to the survey. I started the CMO survey back in 2008 with the mission to collect and disseminate the opinions of top marketers in order to predict the future of markets, track marketing excellence, and improve the value of marketing in firms and in society. I think there's really an ongoing need that marketers have for forward-looking indicators and a variety of types of KPIs to benchmark their performance, their spending, even their views on different topics. So this has been something that I've been doing for a long time, which is one of the advantages of the CMO survey over other types of surveys that you might see in the marketplace. We're able to see that longitudinal view. So when things change, we really have a nice vantage point on that. So let me just jump in and share with you the sample for the survey, for this particular survey, which was a special edition. Usually we run the survey in February and August, but we advanced the August survey into May and then reported out our results in June. This is a sort of a, if you will, a demographic or firmographic view of the types of companies that participated in the CMO survey. So you can see really across sectors. We have a large array of companies. Tech is our biggest sector, but there's a nice balance of B2B and B2C companies, as well as firms from across different sizes as measured by the number of employees. These are all for-profit companies, and they are all US based. So this is the agenda that I'm going to keep for this particular presentation. And in each of these categories, the 7 that I have listed here, I'm going to take you through just a couple of key results. And I want to make sure that we do have some time to get to the final section, in which I'll describe what I think, and I'll share my views on what I think were some missed marketing opportunities. So if we tend to get a little bogged down with questions, I might accelerate us so that we can get to those missed opportunities. And we have a couple of polls that we'll run with you to see how you might have responded to some of these questions. So let's just jump right into macroeconomic forecasts. And I put this question, this set of results, or this single result, I should say, into the presentation because it shows, it provides a nice vantage point on where marketers were and what they were thinking about at this particular point in time. And so we have been, again, tracking things like marketer sentiment for a long time. So I compared the February 2009 results, which is the closest approximation I have to the Great Recession. And you can see that marketers' optimism levels measured on a scale from 0 to 100 dropped to fairly close to that level that we saw in February of 2009. You can see it bouncing its way down to that point when we get to June of 2020. But nevertheless, there was a definite fall off, and it was a fall off that approximated the type of drop off that we saw in the Great Recession. Let me show you some of the reports that marketers had, their beliefs and what they think were going on with, and also what might go on with in the future related to customer behavior. The first is that we asked them to rate basically the frequency with which they saw different types of consumer behavior during the pandemic. And on the left-hand side, what you can see are a set of more frequent consumer behaviors. So these are things like the turn to digital, the increased value placed on digital experiences, greater acknowledgement of companies' attempts to do good. I think those are interesting and important, and we will see that thematically showing up through these results. On the other side, on the right-hand side, we see a set of more infrequent behaviors. These are also telling, I think, because on the one hand, we see that marketers didn't have strong concerns about willingness to pay full price. They thought that consumers would actually continue to pay full price. Obviously, for some segments in the economy, that might drop off, but that was not a major concern, nor were loyalty levels. Marketers did not have those types of concerns. So this is what they thought was going to be happening with consumers during the pandemic. And as we look, we also asked them to give us a forward-looking report. When would these behaviors return to pre-pandemic levels? And what you see is that for the most part, the highest frequency of responses suggests that it would be about 6 to 12 months. I think where we are now suggests that it might be closer to that 12-month range, but it probably depends a lot on industry sectors as well. The one finding that marketers do not expect to return to pre-pandemic levels is the increased value placed on digital experiences. The coronavirus seems to be basically a disjuncture in consumer behavior before and after. Consumers have definitely made the digital turn, and the pandemic required that of them. So marketers do not expect that to change going forward. They expect it to be strong and to continue to be so. So one of the other results that I thought would be interesting to share with all of you is that we've been asking marketers, and you can see I put some of the time series down here, February of 2009, 2020 of February, and then June 2020. So right there, after the pandemic has been going on for a couple months, we asked them to prioritize different aspects of, if you might call it value, or the nature of the way in which they engage with consumers. And you can see the 5 responses that we've been asking about over the years. And what's really telling to me is that we see 2 sort of trends here that I think are important, that marketers expect customers to focus more on trusting relationships, certainly than low price, and maybe more than many of the other things. This is the predominant focus that marketers think customers have. And as you can see, this is not a fluke, this high level. Customers' focus on trusting relationships have increased by about 47% since we first asked this question in 2009. And at the same time, we see this drop off of where low price was really the most important thing in February of 2009. And it had dropped off fairly strongly. It bounced back up a little bit with the pandemic, but nevertheless, we see a 37% drop off from where we were in February of 2009. So I think it's worth asking yourself as marketers, what does a trusting relationship look like for my business? How is it that I can basically signal that to my customers? What should I be doing practically to make that, to reveal that to them? And I'm sure it will vary a little bit depending on the sectors that you're in, but I think these results suggest that this is definitely something that's important, and it's worth thinking about concretely. So let me show you a little bit around now the way that marketers responded, and what they did, and also what they expect to be doing going forward. So one thing that we observed is that marketers did not feel prepared for the pandemic. When we asked them to what degree was marketing prepared to face the pandemic and its economic impact, most companies on this 7-point scale, where 7 is basically we weren't prepared. We didn't have a plan in place. You can see that the mean was about 3.8. So marketers, you might say, well, how could marketers have been prepared? I'm going to show you talk about a company later that I think did a really nice job being prepared and some of the actions that they took. But nevertheless, marketers reported not feeling prepared. And as a result, what we find is that they also concurrently report that they did a lot of improvisation, which means that, in the absence of a plan, they sort of, figure things out as they went along. And this score is pretty high, so 5.6 on a 7-point scale. I would say that's, more improvisation than would be typical in many organizations for marketing on a day-to-day basis. So, considering all of that, when we ask marketers, basically, do you think that the strategies that you're using during the pandemic will be important opportunities for your company? Most marketers report that they definitely believe that that's the case. I'm going to circle back to this idea, as I mentioned at the end, and think about what some of those opportunities might be. I'm going to show you things that they did do, but then I'm going to also show you some things that they didn't do. So when we ask marketers what activities, and thinking about those marketing opportunities, what activities have you shifted your resources to during the pandemic? What we did was I sort of put these into 3 bins. And on the far left side, you see that marketers really did prioritize the digital part of the experience, building better digital interfaces for customers, and also transforming their go-to-market business models. So that was really the focus that marketing took on. In the middle, we see that they didn't do a lot of growth activities related to new products and services or partnerships. And I will come back to that later, as well as some of these deprioritized areas. So what were some of the objectives that marketers had when we asked them these 5 categories? What were you focusing on during the pandemic? You can see that two responses really stand out. One is that in each case, about 33% of marketers reported retaining their current customers and also building brand value that connects with their customers. So I'm going to characterize those later as kind of operating within the funnel, within the existing business that marketers had. And that's really where the attention was, to sort of hold on essentially to what they had, and also to try to build out the brand in important ways that might appeal to their customers. And how is it that companies were using their marketing employees during the pandemic? And we asked them to check off all of the things that they were doing. And there's a group here at the top that I've highlighted that, again, point to doing a lot of activity to get online to promote the company, doing, again, advertising and promotion, reaching out to their current customers, but also improving those digital interfaces. So that, again, continues to show up in the survey, that the focus was on digital, and it was on providing our current customers with the information that they needed so that they would continue to purchase or stay loyal to us. So let's do a little poll here. I'm going to show you some results related to social media. And Jackie is going to post a poll for you. And I think, there we go. So if you could just quickly respond to that, and we'll kind of see where this group ends up. So by what percentage has your social media spend changed during the pandemic? So just pick the number that gets as close as possible to what you experienced. Okay, Jackie. And will we be able to see that? That will come up for us here. Okay, here we go. So we see sort of, I can't do this quick average in my head, but I'm going to say that for this group, probably about a 10% increase was the experience. Obviously, the modal response here is no change, but if we just average these top three, I think it's definitely a positive number. And so let me show you the results for what happened with the survey respondents. So remember, these results were captured in May. You're answering that same question here in September. But what we found in the survey was the following, that again, we've been tracking this, so you can see the percentage. This is the actual percentage. So what percent of your marketing budget are you spending on social media during the pandemic? So this was in February of 2020, it was 13.3. It rose up to 23.2% in June, just as we asked that question. So for this particular sample, at that particular time, there was a 74% increase in the wake of COVID. So more dramatic, my guess is it was in part a function of the time period, but definitely on the positive side. And it's also consistent with this finding here that I report to you, which is that 84% of marketers report using social media for brand building during the pandemic. So this was definitely part of that kind of digital arsenal that marketers brought to bear on the pandemic. And more impressively, perhaps, than just the spending, is that marketers report a lift in the contributions that social media made to company performance. So, and this is a number that we've been tracking for a long time. I show you here on the right side what just the last few time periods where we've asked this question, again, on a 7-point scale, where 7 is very highly, 1 is not at all. These numbers, this 3.3 and 3.4, if I showed you back 4 or 5 years, they look pretty much the same. We have never seen a lift in these numbers. So social media spending has always risen. It's been rising over time, but the actual contributions to firm performance have not risen until this survey. So here we see, depending on what you're comparing it to, about a 27% increase over August of 2019, 23% increase, even over February of 2020. So, and that's going to point a little bit again to the focus on the fact that consumers were turning digital, firms put their digital muscle behind that, and then also digital sales went up as well. So I'll show you some of that in just a second. But this is definitely a promising note for social media. It's something that I'm writing about a little bit now to ask, well, this is a big bump, but how can marketers actually ride this bump? How can we keep that number at 4.2 or even increase it further? So if you have some thoughts about that, please, you can put them either in the chat or you can send those to me personally, because we're about to write a Harvard Business Review article where we're trying to come up with ideas for marketers. Actually, we were going to run a poll there. So Jackie, let's go ahead and put the poll up about the role of marketing in your company during the pandemic. So here the question I want you to answer is, how has the role of marketing in your company changed during the pandemic? So has it decreased in importance, increased in importance, or no change? Okay, I think that's probably long enough. That's an easy question to answer. It doesn't require you to think about spending numbers. So, okay, so 76% of you reported that marketing has increased in importance during the pandemic. And in fact, that number is remarkably close. It's even higher than what we reported back in the survey in June 2020. So here we see 62% of executives, marketing executives, reported an increase in importance. And I think that again goes to the role that marketing played in helping companies come to market digitally more effectively, provide those digital interfaces. You know, when I think about what other function was going to help the company perform well during the pandemic. Marketing really did get center stage during that process in many companies, and this result supports that. Okay, so I don't know if we have any questions that have come in. We can take maybe a few questions here before we move on to the next part of.
Absolutely, Christine, that was incredibly insightful. Really good questions. The first one, you had talked about the relationship between trust versus price, and trust went up, but you didn't really feel the respondents didn't show that price was dramatically impacted. Catherine had asked, do you think this recession will cause more focus on price as the crisis recedes? If you were to predict anything about pricing moving forward, what would you do?
I would say no. I would say no, based on the trend that so obviously if the recession really heats up, if it were to get worse, not better, I would say yes, that we'd have to rethink that. But I think the trend it looks like it's been in place now since 2009, that marketers feel that consumers are not emphasizing price as much. And I would encourage you to think about how you can build more value into your offerings through trust, what that, like, as we were talking about earlier, what that means practically for your business. Because price is never a good way to compete anyway. It's always a downward spiral, right? And so, putting the emphasis on building some other source of value. And so, Catherine, I'm not worried about that. I guess unless the economy really tanks. We'll have to see what happens with the election, I guess.
Yeah, it's a few short days away. Certainly will be interesting. Leaving politics aside, was there an aha moment in this initial phase of research you did, something that you went, oh my gosh, I had no expectation that it would be that high, that low, or something that stands out as really an anomaly based on how long you've been doing the survey?
Well, to me, the importance that firms placed on marketing, I mean, after we saw all the results, it made sense. But I don't think, sitting as we were designing the questions, that that we would have seen how positive it would have been for marketing. And that's not to say that marketers didn't lose their jobs and that there weren't negative effects on marketing. But overall, I think it was a better moment for marketing than, say, many other parts of the organization.
Great. Early on, you had talked about, excuse me, the rise in digital, in quotes. So we've always talked about Gen X, Gen Y really being digital natives. But in your opinion, based on the pandemic, have we all now become digital natives?
Well, out of necessity, I think some of that is the case. People have had to learn to do things, and they've also maybe had a little bit of time to do that, right? We're stuck at home, so learning something new or taking the time that we may have been able to brush aside, now we feel like it really could make a big difference to us. And also, as firms have improved their systems, I think customers are more easily engaged. They know, at least for a while, this is going to be the only way that they can really interact with their brands, the brands that they love.
Great. I have a two-part question, and I want to be sure that the audience listening knows that the questions we don't get to today, we're going to transcribe and sit with Christine and work on getting you answers to all of them. So we want to be respectful of everyone's time, and there's still a bit more data that Christine's going to go through. So keep asking us questions and know that we will get you answers. So two-part question around social media. First of all, any impact, in your opinion, on the boycotts of Facebook? And the second part is, did you do any breakdown of social media channels themselves?
And in terms of the latter question, no, we didn't break it down for this time. We did ask about use of influencers, and I can talk about that later. So there were differences there for especially B2C and B2B. I mean, I gave a webinar like this several months ago, and that the Facebook boycott. This was what everyone was talking about. But from at least what I've read, I haven't seen the actual numbers. I don't think that that's at the forefront of people's minds right now. I mean, it will remain to be seen what happens, going forward. But I would say that doesn't seem to have caused as big a problem as we might have expected when it first arose.
Got it. Okay, and then a quick follow-up, only because you got me intrigued now. You're going to talk about influencers later on. Did you have any series of questions in the survey that talked about whether the business community was looking to insource or outsource their social media work, or is that something you'll get to?
I do have a question about that on the survey. And I don't know if it's in this survey, but it's definitely something that I have asked about consistently. In fact, I have a Harvard Business Review article on that, about how to manage your social media agency relationships. We
Great.
wrote a piece and we give, so if you want to find that on HBR, I can find the link. It's in the online version, which is open and free to the public.
Right.
So maybe we could send that. And I think we came up with some really good insights based on the survey from there that might be helpful to people.
I'll have someone on our side do some research while you continue to present. Thank you so much for the first part. Once again, keep asking your questions in the chat. And Christine, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Adam. So the next topic that I want to take you through is the topic of marketing jobs. So what we see when we ask what % of marketing jobs in your company were lost due to the pandemic is that the average was about 9.2%, which I chart here, but I also intentionally showed you this full distribution because there's a lot of what you might call heterogeneity in this distribution. And what's also really dramatically obvious is that the modal response was 0. So for 62% of companies surveyed, there was no loss of marketing jobs. So most marketers did stay on the job, but then there were many, many marketers who lost a lot. So I think that's informative as you think about your own losses and in your industry, to see that full distribution, because different companies and different industries were hit at different rates, obviously. But the overall response was 9% with a mode of 0. And when we asked, when do you anticipate these jobs returning to pre-pandemic levels, 24% believe that they'll never return. Again, there's a lot of heterogeneity in here. Many companies expect things to return to normal in a month. And you can see that I placed some of the sectors up here where people expected that, the marketers in those sectors expected that to be the case. So obviously, I think for many companies and some of the marketers that I've talked to, there's a sense that maybe the marketing departments were too big in some cases, so now they're more right-sized. Others just lost marketers that they really did need to keep. So, but you can see here the sectors, and I think that might be helpful to some of you who are working in these different industries. And when we ask them about percentage of marketers what they expect to be happening in the next year, you can see that they expect that number to drop off. So it's going to go to negative 3.5%. So hiring is going to be grim. It's not good news for our MBA students here at Duke, but this is what we found, that people expect negative growth on the number of people that are being hired. Now, what's interesting, and this is where I want to do another poll with you, is to ask basically what you think, if you were to be hiring, what kinds of people would you put the emphasis on? So here, thinking about future marketing talent needs, what skills would you now prioritize given the situation we're in? So go ahead and select your top 3 votes out of this poll. Okay. Okay, Jackie, how does that look?
We have about 63% that have voted. Looks like a few are still coming in, if you don't mind keeping it
Oh,
open.
sure, not at all.
All right, looks like that slowed down, so I'm going to end the poll.
Okay, so clear preference here for the ability to pivot, followed by data science and creativity and innovation. So let me show you the results that we have from the survey, which align actually very well with what all of you reported. So the number one ranked option was the ability to pivot, and then creativity and innovation skills. This was followed by navigating ambiguity. So data science for all of you rose up into that top three. But I think, you know, this is something that I'm thinking actually quite a lot about. It's something that I think marketers really do need to understand. Think about how is it that we actually nurture this skill? How do we identify it in people, you know, that we might want to hire, but also how do we nurture it within the people that we currently have? It's something I'm thinking about with my own course development. But it's also something that if marketers are going to go in the direction of these kinds of skill development activities, they're going to have to probably put some more money into their training budgets. We saw a drop off in training budgets from 5.8 of marketing budgets down to 4.4 during the pandemic, which I think makes sense given the need for the dollars to go elsewhere. But it is something, as you think about developing this skill, that will probably require some investment. So let's look at spending now. And what I want to show you is in response to the question, what percentage of your overall marketing budget has been lost or gained during COVID-19 in the prior 2 months? So this again was asked in May. So we're asking them to look back to March and April. And then also when do they anticipate it returning to normal? So one of the things, there's a couple of results that I want you to pay attention to. First, again, the distribution is just huge here, which again shows this heterogeneity of the experience. But we also see the modal response was 0. So 30% of companies, a very high percentage, said that they didn't lose or gain anything. They basically stayed at 0% change. The average response, though, was a gain of 5.2%. And the, again, remember when we asked this question, so this is something that obviously may have changed over the last few months. People expect that budget to return to normal within a 6 to 12 month range. But instead of just looking at this overall number, I thought it might be useful in this case to show you the split out. And remember I mentioned that one of the reports that we published takes every result and breaks it out by these different sectors and size levels, even percent internet sales. So you can kind of find your company in this space and see what those numbers look like. And here we see, again, a lot of different sectors, a lot of companies of different size having different experiences in terms of budget. So this is something that I would encourage you to take a look at if you're looking for a KPI specific to your sector, because healthcare is not going to be the same as, say, consumer services, which ended up, you know, they were just going to be very different from one another. So one of the other numbers I thought I'd share with you in terms of budget. So we know what happened to marketing budgets specifically, but these two metrics, they're actually my favorite measures in the entire CMO survey, which is that we asked people, what percent of your firm's overall budget does marketing currently account for? And then also marketing expenses account for what percent of your firm revenues. What's nice about these numbers is that they put that budget in the context of both the firm revenues or the overall budget. And what you can see here is that the pandemic raises marketing budgets as a percent of both of these bases. So if marketing, you know, and as a result, my interpretation of these results, which we'll see if you agree, is that, you know, if marketing was getting a bigger share of the budget during this time, otherwise, as you know, revenues dropped or as overall budgets dropped, if marketing dropped at the same rate, we wouldn't see these increases. So we saw an 11.5% increase since February for the top number, and almost a 33% increase from the February 2020 number as a percent of revenues. So again, I think this points to the importance of marketing, the importance that firms placed on marketing during the pandemic. Okay, and then quickly just show you a few indicators on firm performance. Here we see the percent of firm sales through the internet. So I've seen numbers from the US Census that are in this sort of 11 to 13 range for retail sales, but remember, we're looking across all sectors, not just companies selling products through retailers, but through all different, retail channels on the internet, but through all different kinds of means. And so that number during the pandemic has risen up to 19.3%, which actually made me really happy to see, because as you can see, it's sort of been fluttering around this between 10 and 12 range for a long, long time. So this is a kind of a break in the direction. It started to break in February of 20, but then it really lifts off due to the pandemic. And then finally, just the overall effect on sales revenues. So here again, I'm plotting for you, but you can see that the average change in sales revenue during those past 2 months was a loss of about 18% for companies. And again, that varies by sector, but that was the overall mean that I thought you would find interesting. And also then the anticipated change in the next 12 months, to give you a forward-looking indicator. People expect that number to rebound. So they expect a 4% increase in that next time period. Okay, so why don't I take a few quick questions, and then I'll go on in and spend the last 15 minutes, if I can, on the missed marketing opportunities section.
Great. Again, just wonderful information. I probably have 10 or 15 questions myself, but let me go to some that the audience has asked. Armand asked early on, have you seen any trends around acquisition? Are companies being more or less acquisitive during this time? Anything that came to mind in your research there?
We did not. I think I have one indicator that I'm going to show you in a minute. But I know that in other parts of the survey, we did not see any lift in that indicator. So we asked people, how are you going to grow? And one of the ways to grow is through by acquiring other companies. We did not see any increase in that, which actually is a bit surprising. So I agree with Armand's hypothesis that that's something that could have been a big opportunity for companies. I would maybe characterize that as another missed opportunity among the set that I'm going to talk about later. Thank you for that question.
I would absolutely agree. Mindy asked a little bit question about marketing effectiveness, and if you've asked any questions or have research around its effectiveness by industry sector or segment.
And so effectiveness meaning ROI.
Did marketing improve differently by sector? Did the impact of marketing affect the company's performance?
We did not ask that question specifically. That was probably a missed opportunity on my part, because I see I've been asked that question before. I have it as a note to ask next time, Mindy, because I think it's a really good question. Because now, maybe you might infer that based on the spending and the budgetary impacts, but it would have been great to have that an answer to that question in the outright.
Well, we'll just tune in after the next survey and we'll get the answer there. Last question for this segment. Emily asked it. The hiring trend went down. Obviously, people unfortunately lost jobs. Marketing activity is going up. So that delta between the need for more marketing performance, but a decline in employee headcount, is that being filled through consulting services? Obviously, we're a staffing firm. So is it through freelance or temporary assignments? Any thoughts around that?
I think maybe a couple of things. First, digital. It may be that digital just requires fewer people, right, to do some of those jobs. So as companies flipped to digital, maybe there were fewer needs for all of the people doing different things in the past. Agency-wise, I'm trying to remember the exact number if that lifted. I think it might have lifted. I know it has been lifting over time. I can't say for sure. I know that the consulting companies, at least in this sample, they were reporting that they were suffering among the most severe revenue losses. So I don't think that was necessarily going to them, but it may have been going to the agencies who were offering more focal digital sources of expertise.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And now let's get back into the last segment and keep asking questions, folks.
Yeah, please do. In fact, here, I think it would be really nice to also see what you think. So in addition to your questions, so let me just take you through, I think there's 6 or 7 of these missed opportunities. And so one of the first is that what we see is that marketers actually tended to turn, surprising to me, that they tended to turn inward to problem solve during this COVID period. So when we ask them what type of information has your company used to guide your marketing strategies during the pandemic, what you can see is if you look all the way to the left, that the highest percentage reported activities were all internally focused. So it was about talking to your marketing team members, talking to your top management team, talking to your sales teams. What I expected to see was more of what was happening kind of in either on the middle or on the right side, that we did some quick research with our customers. We actually looked at our competitors to see what they were doing, or even our non-competitors. What were companies in general doing? And then finally, I thought maybe companies would report that they would have been reflecting on and looking at things that happened either during the Great Recession or other companies that were either in Europe or in China that were already facing COVID or maybe had faced SARS in the past, but that's not the case. So when we break this down, there were some companies, there were some sectors that seemed to do better on these, on some of these types of external strategies. So retailing and wholesaling, they were 70% relative to an overall average of 50. Tech did a much better job with quick research with customers than the average, and then transportation did a much better job in discussions with partners. And the company that I wanted to profile that I mentioned earlier is the HEB, which is a San Antonio-based supermarket chain. They started taking actions immediately as things were coming up. You know, they had a pandemic plan in place since 2005, when the H5N1 threat in China came about. Back in January, they started studying those Chinese retailers and European retailers for, you know, how to deal with different things. You know, by March 16th, they had already given their hourly employees a 2-hour raise because they were having to do a lot more work in terms of stocking shelves and things like that. So there's I think it's an article, I forget exactly where, let me see if I can give you the name of I think it's in the name of the article that I read. It's in Texas Monthly because it's a San Antonio company, and they profile HEB in a way that I thought might be useful to some of you. So I think that's worth taking a peek at. The second missed opportunity, in my view, is a missed customer acquisition opportunity. So if you remember, if we look over here on the left, that 65% of marketers reported that they believed new customers have been attracted to our products and services during the pandemic. So it's a bit disappointing that only 14% ranked customer acquisition as their #1 objective, and 22% ranked customer acquisition as their second objective. And there were some exceptions to this. As you can see, there were tech and professional services reported a higher focus on customer acquisition. But I think this may have been, whenever I think about disruption, even of the negative type that COVID presented, I think it can represent an opportunity for some companies. And so I thought this might be a way that companies could think through that opportunity. Who were those customers that they could have tried to acquire? And not just focus on retention of their current customers or focusing on building their brand, which we talked about, but rather really going after customer acquisition. I'm sorry, they're doing some something here in my driveway, so there's a little bit of background noise. So the third opportunity is that, or excuse me, missed opportunity is that marketers stayed focused on the funnel and didn't explore other strategic growth opportunities. So when we asked marketers, how much marketing effort have you focused on building within the funnel or outside the funnel, you can see that split. And so I think that's a missed opportunity. Why do I say that? Because what it ended up doing, I think, is leaving some of these activities that I pointed to earlier, weakly prioritized, growth opportunities that, again, could have been potential sources of opportunity for the company, including things like expanding into new products and services or building partnerships, with the latter being, to me, the one that really stands out even more than products and services, because you have companies who are both struggling, and so joining together may have been an opportunity for some of them. And here's some other evidence that points to the fact that employees were focused on the funnel and not on growth. You can see that, you know, companies prioritized online promotion, but they didn't prioritize using employees to generate new product and service ideas or to explore new partnerships. And they didn't use social media to identify new product and service opportunities. Some companies did, and we've listed them over here, but for the most part, these opportunities were not something that most companies exercised. Okay, the fourth missed opportunity is that I think marketers maybe moved too fast for experimentation. I reported earlier that they did a lot of improvisation. And they reported this kind of need to pivot. At the same time, when we asked them, basically, did you do a lot of experimentation, meaning did you sort of systematically vary things to try to figure out, you know, does this strategy work or does this marketing mix element work? There wasn't a lot of that systematic experimentation. In fact, only 29% of marketers report investing resources in research and experimentation capabilities during this time. Tech stood out, and they stood out in a number of these different responses as being able and willing to do some more experimentation. The fifth missed opportunity is that we didn't see any shift in firms' willingness to have their brands take a stance on politically charged issues. So this is a question I've been asking, as you can see, for the last few years, as all of this is heated up in the marketplace. And I guess I expected that we would see some kind of shift because, you know, marketers knew that customers were more concerned about companies' willingness to do good. But it seems like the political activism is something where marketers just don't feel that customers have as much of an appetite for this as you might think. So most companies, 80% or so, stay on the sidelines and don't get their companies involved in these types of activities. You can see in this insight box, we list some of the sectors that do that. B2C services stand out. About 30% of companies are willing to do it. And tech is another one that stands out at 35, as well as banking and finance, which is interesting. The whole, everything that happened over the summer, we might see a shift in this the next time. I'm not sure, because even though companies are making changes now related to all of the race-related activities, I think that issue is no longer very political. It's become kind of a new normal, and so companies might feel that they can jump in without taking as much risk on that issue. And then finally, what we see is that COVID has actually dampened sustainability efforts. So companies have shifted away from more strategic things like changing products and services or changing partners, which can really have a big impact on sustainability outcomes, to focusing more on changing marketing promotions. So a weaker emphasis, a much more tactical emphasis, if you will, and probably one that won't have as much of an impact. Okay, so I think we're ready. We have about 8 more minutes or so for some additional questions. I'm happy to take those from you now.
Thanks so much. Again, really, really insightful, and thank you for your team's efforts and the work that went into creating this. It's certainly not something that's easy to do overnight.
Thank you.
The last slide, you talked about sustainability initiatives, and we have a tremendous interest in environmental sustainability and governance, ESG reporting. So the interest level is increasing, but companies are using it less and less as a marketing opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this shows, at least during the pandemic. And you might think about that as, I hope what we'll see when we ask this question again is that it's just basically a pause in that emphasis, because I do think it is important. I've written some things about this myself, urging marketers to do what they can, because I do think it's important. So we'll see, we'll see what happens over time.
Very interesting. I know as a publicly traded company, the investor community has become very focused on ESG and ESG reporting. Okay, moving on to a great question. Kurt has asked a couple of questions around the hospitality industry. Any insights into, obviously we know the impact, but shifts, trends, thoughts around domestic, international travel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the sector-specific results can vary quite a bit, as you've seen. I would say, that's probably worth taking a look at that report. And I'll show you in just a second where you can find that. But obviously, I think that sector has probably been devastated more than others. And I don't know exactly, if it's just travel or if it's hotel that Kurt's talking about, but that's a very difficult situation. I can't give you any specific numbers, Kurt, but I do know that when we look at those, the ranges of results that I've shown you, that those sectors, and I think tend to end up in consumer services often, or in transportation, depending on, how companies classify themselves. That's where we see some of those really big numbers, like, 90% drop off and things that I reported earlier.
Great. Jonna asked a question about, are you seeing a trend towards companies being risk forward or risk adverse during this time period, particularly as we've been in this pandemic stage for a bit?
I would say, based on these missed opportunities that I've shared with you, I would say more risk averse. I think in part because there was, especially at the time when we ran the survey, people were in a bit of a mad scramble, just trying to figure out what was what. And it was very hard to be strategic at that time. And in general, what we find, we've asked a question over time about, do you put an emphasis on basically managing the present or preparing for the future? And I think 60% of marketers report being focused on basically managing the present, and only about 30% preparing for the future. My guess is that became even more dramatic during COVID. I'd like to see those percentages flip. That obviously we need to take care of today, but I think the best marketers are, out in front of trends, or they're helping create those trends, right? And not just always being in this reactive mode. I know that's very difficult these days, but I would say, thinking about what those growth opportunities are, thinking about, how you can use some of this difficult time as a source of opportunity is probably worth considering more deeply.
Great. I know that we're coming up at the end of the conversation. So one really simple question, and then one, I think, thoughtful one, and then we'll go to your last slide or two. How often does your survey come out?
So we run the survey twice a year. So the next survey will come out in February. So we usually launch in, the results come out in February and in August, twice a year.
Great. Question about remote work. I think that many of us have seen that remote is actually working. So any information, data points around outbound strategies, meaning people staying out of the office, going into the office, thoughts, insights around that? It's
a really interesting observation that, it seems to be working. I mean, that's my sense, even in education, that there's some things that are much more difficult But there is some upside to all of this. And I really don't think we will go back to what we had before. You know, either in my world that it will ever go back to exactly the way that it was. And I suspect that that's the case for many, many companies as well, especially with marketing, that we just won't have as much face-to-face. And I know that that's difficult. And I've heard in other settings where marketers have reported that, or marketing leaders have reported that it's their marketing employees that actually suffer a little bit more with, you know, outside of the office, you know, when they can't have that socialization and the opportunity to, you know, to collaborate face to face in the way that they used to. So I think, again, it's hard for me to say exactly what will happen, but I think it's worth thinking about how we can use what we have to generate, you know, some of that, whether it's mentoring or just even creative kind of collaboration. I just ran in my class with 432 students a huge design thinking workshop, which I thought, this is insane. This is never going to work. It actually worked pretty well. I mean, it wasn't 100%, you know, what it would have been if we were face to face, but it was probably good enough. And so I guess that's maybe one way to think about it. How can we actually convert on and at least get some of this good work done while we're still apart?
Yeah, I know that from within my own team, technology has really helped, whether it's Teams or Zoom or Slack, and finding ways to keep, first of all, the visual face-to-face. It's nice to see people's faces and to have that social component and interaction. Again, wonderful. I know that you've got one more slide to show, to put some data up, and then we will close it out. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. So I just wanted to let everybody know that the next survey is in February 2020. And you can, I'm just going to click through so I can show you, not that one. Let's see, click through. Can I click through on that? Let's see. Here we go. If you click through on the slide, no, it doesn't look like it's going to let me do that. I'm showing you some of the results that I had in the back here. If you, and I think Jackie is going to put some of these links into the chat. If you are interested in participating in the next survey, if you are a for-profit marketer in the United States, I would love to have your participation in the next survey. If you would like to look at any of the results, including the results from this webinar, I posted those on the link that you see here that says /results. So if you just go to cmosurvey.org, then you can get this webinar deck and also the any of the results that are broken out by different sectors, as well as all of the past results. I make everything completely free of charge because really my mission is to help marketers do a better job. And so I hope that the results are useful to all of you. So thank you for the opportunity, Adam. This was really a lot of fun for me.
Oh, it's way more fun for us, and you have been generous with your time and your expertise. And as I said when we started, I've been a follower of your survey for years and have found its ability to impact my team and myself in terms of our decision making. It's the best survey that we find. So thank you. I want to be sure that everyone knows that you will, if you've registered for the webinar, you will get an email, and the email will have a link. All of the links that you see here, as well as a link to a recording of today's conversation. So if you want to come back and see that. I also really want to thank Jackie, Melissa, Catherine, and the team that works behind me at Creative Circle for it's really their hard work and attention to the detail that makes conversations like this possible. So Christine, thank you very much. Creative Circle marketing team, thank you very much. And we really appreciate everyone's time. Stay safe and have a great afternoon.